In this video, I'm going to share with you a step-by-step pattern for making this viral rose bouquet coaster. So let's get started.
Hey guys, welcome to DIY Crafts.
For this project, I am using 4-ply 100% cotton yarn and a 3mm crochet hook. However, you can use your favorite yarn along with its suitable hook size. Now let us begin by making a magic circle. For that, make a loop on the hand as shown in the video, and now from the center of the circle, pull up a loop and adjust the center. Now adjust the loop on the hook, and then let's start making the first row. Begin with chain 3. So yarn over and pull up the loop. So that's chain 1, 2 and 3. Now we are going to count this chain 3 as a first double crochet in the row 1. And we can put a stitch marker into the third chain so that it will be easy for us to identify where to put a stitch marker. Now yarn over, insert the hook into the center and then pull up a loop. Now you will have 3 loops on the hook. Yarn over, draw the yarn through first 2 loops and you will be left with 2 loops on the hook. Yarn over again and pull through those 2 loops. That's the double crochet. Now chain 3 is the first stitch and then there is another double stitch. So there are 2 stitches, and now we are going to repeat this same stitch for 11 times into the center to make a total of 12 stitches, including the starting chain 3. So that's the 4th stitch. Yarn over into the center, pull up a loop, yarn over out of first 2 loops, yarn over again out of second 2 loops. So that's the 5th stitch. This one is the 6th stitch, and then the 7th one into the center. Always remember to include the starting tail end along with the magic circle so that the project will be closed completely without any gaps in the middle. Once all the double crochet stitches are done, you can cross check the count to make sure that you have 12 stitches including the starting chain 3. And then pull the starting tail end tightly to close the center. And this leaves no gap in the center. That means your magic circle is successfully closed. Now remove the stitch marker carefully and identify the stitch where you have removed the stitch marker from. Now insert the needle into that loop, yarn over and make a slip stitch. For that, draw the yarn through all the loops on the hook. So this completes the first row and you will have 12 double crochet stitches in the center. Now let's begin making the second row with a height chain of chain 3. And this one we are going to count it as a first double stitch in our second row. So for that reason I am putting a stitch marker on the top of the third chain. Now yarn over, insert the needle into the same stitch where we have started making the second row. In that stitch we are going to make 1 double crochet. So yarn over, pull through 2 and pull through 2. That means the DC and the chain 3, both of the stitches worked in the same stitch, acts as an increase. Then chain 1. Now I am going to make a DC increase in the next stitch. So yarn over, insert the hook into the next stitch on the top of the second stitch and then drop a loop and make 1 double stitch. Into the same stitch, make 1 more double stitch. So whenever 2 double crochet stitches worked in the same stitch, we call it as a DC increase. So that's the DC increase and then chain 1. Now in the next stitch, again we are going to make a DC increase. That's 2 DCs worked into the same stitch. So there is 1 and then the second one. Now make chain 1. And we are going to repeat this pattern of DC increase and chain 1 throughout the row until you reach the last stitch, or you can always keep a count on the number of increases you are doing according to the pattern. So excluding the starting chain 3 and DC, you will have 11 DC increases. Once the last DC increase is also completed, make chain 1 and then we are going to make a slip stitch onto the first chain to finish the second row. And by the end of the second row, we'll have 24 double crochet stitches with 12 chain 1 gaps in between. This is how the project looks like. Now for the next row, we are going to start with the third row by making a height chain of chain 3. Again, we will count this chain 3 as a first double stitch in the third row. So you can put a stitch marker on the top of the third chain. Whenever you feel there is a little bit of more gap in between the first stitch and the last slip stitch, you can just reduce that by making tighter slip stitches. Okay, coming back to the pattern, after the first chain 3, in the next stitch we have to make one DC increase and then make chain 1. So we are actually stacking chain 1 spaces. So there is one chain 1 space in the previous row, and after the pattern we are making chain 1 space in the next row on top of that. So for the third row we are going to repeat the pattern of 1 DC followed by 1 DC increase and then make another chain 1. And this pattern have to be repeated for 11 times. So the first repetition is already completed. Now this is the second repetition, that's 1 DC, and in the next stitch we are going to make a DC increase, that is 2 DCs worked into the same stitch, and then chain 1. And repeat this pattern throughout the row until you reach the starting point. But always remember, the starting chain 3, if you count it as a DC, that also makes the part of a pattern. And if you count it as a DC, then you have to repeat it as 12 times. If not, if you are just actually following the pattern step by step, you have to repeat it for 11 times, excluding the the first chain 3 and DC increase. So here we are doing the last repetition, 1 DC and 1 DC increase, then chain 1, remove the stitch marker and make a slip stitch into that stitch. This completes the third row with 36 double crochet stitches and 12 chain 1 gaps. So to reduce the gap in between the last and first stitches, you can make the tighter slip stitches. Now let's start making row 4. Begin with chain 3 and put a stitch marker in the third chain. Now for the fourth row, the pattern is 1 DC, 1 increase and 1 DC. So if you count the starting chain 3 as 1 DC, in the next stitch we are going to make a DC increase, that is 2 DCs into the same stitch, and we'll have one more stitch, make 1 DC on top of the next stitch, and then make chain 1. So for the pattern of fourth row, we have to make DC increase DC and chain 1 and repeat this throughout the row. So this is for the second part, the second portion of the pattern. 1 DC, 1 increase, that's 2 double stitches worked in the same stitch, and 1 DC, and then chain 1. Now continue this pattern throughout the row until you reach the starting point. So here I am making the last DC of the fourth row, then chain 1, and now we are going to make a slip stitch on top of the first stitch. Remove the stitch marker, insert your hook and then make a slip stitch, and this completes the fourth row with 48 double stitches with 12 chain 1 gaps in between. This is how the project looks like after completing 4 lines. Now let's continue to make the fifth line. Again begin with a height chain of chain 3 and then put the stitch marker on the top of the third chain. So here I am going to begin this project like the fifth row with an increase. However, you can put the increase at the last for each set also. So for the first increase, yarn over and put the needle into the same stitch where we have done the chain 3. So the chain 3 and the DC will together make an increase in the first stitch. And then in the next 3 stitches, we are going to make 1 double crochet in each stitch. That's 1 DC. and then the second one and the third one. Now make a chain 1 gap. That's the pattern we are going to repeat for the 5th row. So begin with an increase, that is 2 double crochet stitches worked into the same stitch. That's 1 and 2. That's an increase, and then make 3 DCs. That's 1 DC, 2 and 3. Then make chain 1 and repeat this pattern throughout the row until you reach the starting point. Here I am making the last DC of the 12th repetition, and once it is done, make chain 1, and then we are going to make a slip stitch on the top of the first stitch. That's chain 1, and then insert your hook onto the first stitch, that is chain 3, and then make a slip stitch. So by the end of the 5th row, we'll have 60 double stitches with 12 chain 1 gaps in between. Now let's continue to make the 6th row. Begin with chain 3. Count it as a first DC in your row 6. So you can put a stitch marker into the 3rd chain. And now in the next stitch, make 1 DC. So we have already done 2 double crochet stitches. One is chain 3 and the second one is a DC. Now in the next stitch, we are going to make a DC increase, that is 2 double crochet stitches into the same stitch. And we'll have 2 more stitches. Make 2 DCs, 1 in each of the next 2 stitches. So that's 1, and this is the second DC. Then make chain 1. And for the 6th row, we are going to repeat this pattern of 2 DC, DC increase and 2 DC throughout the row. So that's 1 DC, and in the next one make 1 more DC, that makes 2 DCs, and then in the next stitch make an increase, that's 2 DC worked into the same stitch, and then make 2 more DCs, 1 in each of the next 2 stitches, 1 and 2. That's the last 2 DC, and then chain 1. So repeat this pattern of 2 DC increase 2 DC chain 1 throughout the row until you reach the starting point. After making the last chain 1, remove the stitch marker, put your needle on top of the first chain 3, and then make a slip stitch to close the 6th row with 72 single stitches with a 12 chain 1 gaps in between. And now let's continue to make the 7th row. Begin with chain 3. Count it as first DC in your 7th row. So for that, to put a stitch marker in that. And then in the next 4 stitches, make 1 DC in each stitch. That will make a total of 5 DC including the first chain 3. So that's the 3rd one, 4 and 5. Now in the next stitch, make an increase, that is 2 DCs into the same stitch. So that's 1 and 2. Then make chain 1. So for this last row, we are going to repeat this pattern of 5 DC, increase and chain 1 throughout the row. So let's continue. That's 2 DC, 3, 4, 5, and in the next stitch make 1 increase, that's 2 DCs into the same stitch, and then chain 1, and continue this pattern throughout the row until the starting point. So once it is completed, make a slip stitch and join the 7th row with 84 single stitches and 12 chain 1 gaps in between. Now chain 1 and trim the thread, pull out and then make a fasten off knot. So after completing the 7 rows, the circular base is completed. Now for the next row, we are going to add a green color yarn to give the base for the roses, like the leaf, to replicate the look of the leaves. So now take the green color yarn and insert the hook into any one of the chain 1 gaps. Now pull out the yarn out of this chain 1 gap and then make chain 3. So that's chain 1, 2 and 3. Now into the same chain 1 gap we are going to make a V-stitch. Like here we are going to make 2 DC, chain 1 and 2 DC into the same chain 1 space. So yarn over, insert the hook into the chain 1 gap and make 1 DC. So that's chain 3 and 1 DC counted as 2 DCs. Then make chain 1. Now into the same chain 1 gap we are going to make 2 more DCs. So again yarn over, insert the hook into the same chain 1 gap. So that's 1 DC and then make 1 more DC. So let us say this as a V-shaped cluster stitch. So 2 DC, chain 1 and 2 DC, and we are going to repeat this pattern. And here is the chain 1 gap where we have to attach the rosebud onto it. Now for the next placement we are going to skip the next 3 stitches. So first chain 3, second DC and third DC. So skip those 3 stitches, and on the top of the 4th stitch we are going to repeat this V-stitch cluster. So yarn over, insert the hook onto the 4th stitch, then make a DC. So that's 1 DC, and into the same chain, into the same stitch make 1 more DC. So that's 2 DC, then make chain 1, and into the same stitch we are going to make 2 more DCs. Don't worry, the hole will not become so big unless you pull it out tightly. You just have to adjust the gap to fit in the last DC. So here completes the second V-stitch, 2 DC, chain 1 and 2 DC. Now skip the next 3 DCs and the next clusters will go into the chain 1 gap. So here we'll have a V-stitch cluster, 1 in each of the chain 1 gaps and 1 in the middle of all the DCs gap. So just count it and do the stitches appropriately. So that's a V-stitch cluster in chain 1 gap. Then skip 3 stitches, and on the top of the 4th stitch we are going to repeat the same V-stitch cluster. So that's DC, another DC, and then chain 1 and 2 more DCs into the same stitch. And then the next cluster goes into the chain 1 gap. Again repeating the same set of stitches, 2 DC, chain 1 and 2 more DCs into the same chain 1 gap. Again skip 3 more stitches, and in the next 4th stitch we are going to make another V-stitch cluster, and we are going to repeat it throughout the row until the starting point. So by the end of this pattern we will have a total of 24 clusters of 24 V-stitch clusters, and each V-stitch cluster is a set of 2 DC, chain 1 and 2 DC. So after making the last one, that's the last DC of V-stitch cluster. Now remove the stitch marker on the top of the first starting chain 3, and into that stitch insert your hook and then make a slip stitch. This completes the 8th row. Now chain 1 and then cut the excess thread, leaving a small tail end of 4 inches will be good enough. Now pull out the yarn on the hook to make a knot. So here we have completed making the veins or the leaves part of the roses as well. Now the remaining part is just to make a bunch of roses and stick them to the project. I have already shared this mini rosebuds pattern on my YouTube channel. If you haven't watched it, I've shared the link in the description, or you can even check the iCard. So what you can do is you prepare those mini roses and attach them at the top of each chain 1 gap using a glue. If not, you can just take a pink color yarn or whatever flowers of roses you wanted. You can take that yarn and continue with the pattern as I'm showing it to you again now in a different way. So now identify the chain 1 gap in between the V-stitch cluster. It's not the gap in between the V stitches, it is the chain 1 gap in between the V stitch, at the middle of the V stitch. So now insert your hook and pull out the yarn from that chain 1 gap and then make chain 8. That's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 and 8. So if you wanted a bigger rosebud, you can increase the chain up to 10, but chain 8 will look good as this one is a coaster. Now make 2 more chains extra and now leave 2 chains from the hook, and then from the 10th chain we are going to work on the pattern. So yarn over, insert the hook into the 10th chain and pull up a loop. Yarn over and draw the yarn through all the 3 loops on the hook. So that's a half double stitch, and make 1 more half double stitch into the same stitch, which means we have done a half double crochet increase in our first chain, I mean the 10th chain, and following which we'll have total of 9 more chains, and in each chain we are going to make a double crochet increase, that is 2 double crochet stitches worked into the same stitch, and we are going to continue this pattern throughout the foundation chain. So that's 1 DC increase, then the second DC increase, and now into the next chain another DC increase, that's 1 DC and another DC worked into the same stitch, and like this continue until the starting chain. Now after completing the last double crochet increase in the last chain, make chain 1 and then trim the excess thread, leaving a tail end of approximately 2 to 3 inches. Pull up a loop and then fasten off. So finish off the flower. And now using the tapestry needle we are going to hide the starting and finishing tail ends. So take the tail end into the tapestry needle and now turn your work onto the back side. Now weave in the excess thread into the project into a couple of stitches so that the tail end doesn't show to the front side of the project. Now after weaving in the tail end, you can trim the excess thread close to the project, and in the same way we are going to hide the starting tail end as well. So take the tail end into the tapestry needle, and now you can, if you want, you can just secure it by making a knot at the beginning. If not, you can just directly weave in. So here I am just making a simple knot at the first stitch, and once the knot is completed you can insert rest of the tail end into the project and then trim the excess thread close to the project. Now once it is done, turn the project to the front side, and now let's give the shape to the rose. So for that I am using a super glue. If you want, you can use a hot glue gun or a fabric glue as we are using a cotton yarn. So now take a good amount of glue and apply it at the foundation chain. That's the chain 10 which we have made, and now slowly fold it to give the shape of a rosebud, and let the glue to cure so that the shape will be fixed without leaving it. Now put a little bit of amount on the last petal and also at the base of the rosebud to fix it on the project. So this completed the first bud. Now I am leaving the next one to make the rosebuds alternatively with the dark pink yarn. And then after completing all the rosebuds, this is how the project looks like. So now I have to weave in the ends. Once the ends are weaved in, this is how the coaster looks like. So you can check the bouquet form, and if you feel that roses are scattered and you want more number of roses, you can fill up the gaps with an alternative color or with the same color. And once all the flowers are completed, your rose bouquet coaster will be ready. Secure it with a bow at the front, and that should complete your project. I hope you all enjoyed watching this tutorial. Do give this pattern a try and let me know your thoughts in the comments section below. Written pattern is given in the description. Do check it out. Don't forget to share your work to me on Instagram. See you all in the next video.
Thank you for watching. Please like the video, share it and subscribe to DIY Crafts.